approach. We talked a little bit about honesty, but what are some of the ways that the state board talks about honesty? The educator shall not engage in conduct that involves dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation. For example, a statement of your professional qualifications. If you used an online program to develop that degree that you presented from Duke University, that's problematic. If you are dishonest in your application, we talked about that, that's problematic. Or something about anything about your college credentials, that's dishonest, and any dishonesty there is problematic. What about representing completing a college or staff development credit? What if you turned in that you attended a professional development that you did not? That's dishonest. That's a violation of the requirements related to honesty. What about evaluating or grading students or personnel? We're honest when it comes to submitting financial or program compliance reports. It's actually a crime to submit false reports. So it's important that you make sure that when you submit something that we can rely on that and know that it's truthful and honest and that it can be backed up. Submissions of information in the course of an official inquiry by the local board or the state board. What does that mean? That means if I'm not investigating you, but I come calling you because of your neighbor, your teacher neighbor, that you don't get the option to say, I'd rather not say, or, oh no, I didn't see anything. Because guess what happens when I find out that you did know about it? Now we're not talking about your neighbor teacher. Now we're talking about you. So when it comes to investigations and things like that, the honesty requirements mean that you also have to be honest in the investigations that might be conducted by either your employer or a licensing agent. So, and that's important. Submission of information in the course of investigation by a law enforcement. As bad as it is for you to be dishonest in an employment investigation about somebody, it's equally as bad for you to be dishonest in the law enforcement investigation. And they have mechanisms that we don't. I mean, you could ultimately be charged with obstruction of justice or something like that. It may result in a criminal concern for you. So, even if you don't like it, and I'll tell you, teachers, there are several things that I know about teachers from my own family, but also from doing this job for so long, is that teachers are generally not confrontational people. They like to get along, everybody wants the air in the building to be clear and happy, and when there's an investigation, you all would just really, unless you know that a kid is desperately in danger, you really just prefer to stay out of it. That's not going to happen. That's not going to be allowed to happen. Because and this is my personal viewpoint, but I was just saying this yesterday, that if you want to improve the level of respect for teachers, we have got to be able to get the bad teachers out. So if a teacher is doing something wrong, and you know about it or you have information that may help get to the bottom of whether that is or isn't happening, we need to get that teacher out. Because it shouldn't be that you're working your tail off and doing a good job and doing everything above board, and you're in the same boat as the teacher next to you who is not. It ought to be that we weed out, if you're going to maintain the integrity of a profession, we have to weed out the people who are not doing the right thing in that profession. Otherwise, everybody gets lumped together. The bad teachers and the good teachers are seen the same. So, also DSS, if there's a DSS investigation, we have to participate honestly. You're not required, of course, to self-incriminate. So if you're not required to give incriminating information about yourself where there's the potential of criminal liability. Oh, I think I'm pushing the wrong button. There we go, sorry. What about teachers with monetary reimbursement for things or monetary aspects to your job? First of all, you cannot solicit current students or their parents to purchase equipment or things like that from the educator in a private capacity. What is this? This is like, I mean, I don't mean to be sexist, but women know all about this. This is the pampered chef. This is the unique makeup. This is the soap powder jewelry where somebody is constantly hounding you to buy something that they're selling. That is not appropriate in the school environment. We don't want people to run from you because you're constantly trying to get them to buy something, or that they feel compelled to try to buy something from you when that doesn't fit their budget. So we don't do that. We also don't tutor students who are currently assigned to the educators' classes. This is one area where I see teachers make mistakes, and I think well-meaning teachers can mess this one up. The idea behind this provision is that, you may be thinking, I've got this kid in my math class, his mom wants me to tutor him after school for 20 bucks an hour, he needs the help, I'll do it. That's not how we look at it. And the reason we don't look at it that way is because if you can envision this assuming the perception that might be out there. But one of the issues that we look at it is, well, because I'm a crappy teacher during the day, I can make extra money at night. Right? That's why the board, the state board has this provision in place. It really, if you're tutoring for money to a kid that you're already teaching during the day, if you're tutoring that person after school for money, it's a disincentive to good instruction. The worse teacher you are, the more money you make. And so that's why this is not the case. Now, there are, school systems sometimes have partnerships with agencies that help tutor kids and things like that. So I think if you've got a question, the thing to do is to run it by the administrator in your building. And if it's not your student, if you teach the 3rd grade and a 6th grade student who is not your student, ask if their parent wants you to tutor, then you can talk to your principal about that, and that might be an option. What we're trying to prevent is a situation where you're getting extra money to provide instruction to kids that you're already being paid to try to instruct during the day. An educator shall not accept compensation or anything of value other than your regular compensation performing services. And this is what I was talking about with the coffee cup with the Hershey Kisses. This does not restrict performance of any overtime or supplemental services. So for example, coaching or things like that, but also they don't apply or restrict accepting gifts or tokens of minimal value. That's how the coffee cup with the Hershey Kisses is expressly allowed in the board policy. And accepted openly from students, parents, or others. Why does the openness matter? And if you it's an easy word to miss in this policy, but I think it's one that you should put in your mind and tuck away there, because the openness is important. The more transparent you are as a teacher, the more open you are, the more public you are with your activities and the things you do in the classroom, the less concern there is about any nefarious motivation or any wrongdoing or misconduct. The more open you can be. So this is an example. If you get your mug with Hershey Kisses on it in the classroom and you think, thank you so much, Johnny, for da-da-da, then that's less concerning. Where you start accepting gifts, not in the open, but privately, hey, if you stop by my house, I have something for you. That kind of thing, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It may still be a coffee mug with Hershey Kisses in it. So it's no more wrong to do that. But the more private it is, the more defensive you're going to have to be about it, the more concern there's going to be about it, the more likely there are going to be issues with it. What about your conduct with students? The educator shall treat all students with respect. All students. Even that kid that drives you crazy. The educator shall not commit abusive acts or sexual exploitation. And they give you some examples. Remember that just because it's not listed here doesn't mean it's not prohibited. This is an example list, not an exhaustive list. You can't use profanity. You can't solicit sexual acts. You can't commit acts of child abuse. You can lose your job for things that you might do to your own child if they're a student in the district. So if you're deemed to have abused your own child, and you're an employee of the district, that could be problematic for you as far as your employment. We don't employ people that abuse kids. We're a school. that doesn't fly. Any act of sexual harassment, any intentional solicitation, encouragement, or consummation of a romantic relationship. It doesn't even have to ultimately happen, but if you're soliciting it or encouraging it, or one of the things that I see often when we're in these arenas of investigating these kinds of allegations is kind of a grooming. Nothing has happened yet, but the communications are very clearly going in a certain direction. The 14-year-old kid doesn't recognize it, but an adult recognizes it. That just the way things are being said, what kinds of questions are being asked. It's definitely, and you can see it's a pattern. So there's grooming. There's I think her name is Dr. Crankshaft. And She is a person who testifies as an expert in litigation involving sexual relationships between teachers and students. And one of the things that she has said, and this has been a couple years back, but one of the things that she has said is that almost every single one of those relationships at this point began with the use of some kind of technology. So it was either, private messaging on Facebook, or private text messaging, or private emails going back and forth. So you need to know, what does that mean for you? That means that you need to know that there is a perception and a reality that when teachers are privately using technology with students, that is an environment in which they are often preying upon students to try to solicit these kind of relationships. So, and we'll talk about social media in a minute, and I think that's important for you to know, but just keeping that in the back of your head. There is research that shows that the way that these inappropriate relationships starts is through the use of technology. So you need to be hyper vigilant about the ways in which you're communicating with kids using technology. The educator shall keep in confidence personally identifiable information. Sometimes this is very benign, the way that teachers can mess this up. So, for example, I've had teachers, and the school systems are adopting like crowdfunding, those kinds of policies now, because teachers want to have GoFundMe sites to get equipment for the classroom and things like that. And it got a little bit difficult for boards to manage, and they were running afoul of some of the obligations. So, an example of this might be if a teacher has a GoFundMe site to get a wheelchair for Susie so-and-so in their class, that is releasing confidential information, unintentionally, but releasing confidential information. It may be that people can observe that Susie so-and-so is in a wheelchair, but as her teacher, you are not supposed to disclose it. So what they come in and see and glean on their own is not our responsibility, but what we say or what we write about our students is our responsibility. So that's important information. Or, so-and-so, I need money for so-and-so, he can't afford lunch. Or things like that. The motivation is to try to help a kid. But in doing so, there are violations that involve releasing confidential information about that student. So you want to make sure before you go do anything like that you're in compliance with board policy and you're in communication with the building administrator. The educator shall not violate the constitutional or civil rights of a student, and the educator shall make all required reports. What about alcohol? It sounds like you have just been through a drug-free workplace, so I won't focus on this heavily. I'm not sure how much you talked about alcohol, but I will talk about it because we have a lot of new teachers who are young. I mean, they may be 22, they may be not married with kids yet, so they have time and money that to spend where the rest of us do not. So sometimes what happens with that is that they're still kind of in that college way. They're out drinking a lot and things like that. What kind of impact can that have on them as a teacher? Well, if the parents of the students in your school are watching you be carried out of the bar 3 Fridays out of the month, they may lose confidence in you. They may be worried about what shape you're coming to school in on Friday morning when they saw you out Thursday night. And you may find yourself in a situation where they ask for kids not to be placed in your class. I've had that happen before, where it was like, I see her all the time, I don't want my kid in that class. I don't know what she does, but I know what she does on Thursday, and I know that every Friday is going to be a waste. So that is where something like, yes, are you allowed to drink? Obviously. Your free time, you can do things in your free time, especially if it's legal. But the fact that you can drink doesn't mean that something that you're permitted to do can be done in such a way that arises to a problem in your classes. If you're a high school teacher and you get a DUI and that's all over the newspaper, how are you going to teach your kids about following rules? You're sitting there with a pending criminal charge. So those kinds of things, the drinking can arise to that level at some point. Obviously, no matter how bad you may want to at times, you can't be under the influence of, possess, use, or consume a controlled substance on school premises or at a school-sponsored activity. And you can't be under the influence of alcohol on a school premises or at a school-sponsored activity. involving students. And of course, you cannot furnish alcohol to any student except as indicated in the professional duties of administering legally prescribed medication, alcohol, or controlled substance. If you have permission and it's compliant with your policy and you want to provide an Advil to a student and that's allowed, then you can do that. That won't be a violation. But you cannot obviously provide alcohol, and you obviously cannot provide not medications for which the student it would not be eligible or doesn't have a prescription. You also comply with the criminal laws. You shall not commit, and there are certain acts that are referred to that are pretty heinous crimes. You can't misuse public funds or property. And one of the ways this happens is, this is another side to the whole GoFundMe thing. The money, and this is why school systems have stepped in and had to develop policies and very strict procedures on it. Because the money comes in, let's say you want $5 grand for something in your classroom and you get $3,500. You can't buy the thing that you wanted. What happened to the $3,500 that people gave you? So the school systems across the state have been adamant about developing these, working on developing these, because fundraising looks different for schools now than it did 20 years ago. So they're working on those policies, but just keep that in the back of your mind. How are those funds being used? You can't practice the profession during time your license has been revoked, obviously, and you can't retaliate for reports of violations. I can tell you this, if we are investigating, you can feel confident that we're going to turn every stone and get to the bottom of whether something did or didn't happen. Many times, the allegations against a teacher may have been embellished, or very rarely are they completely false. I've only had one circumstance that I can remember in my career that at the end of the day, the teacher didn't admit to what we were investigating, and in that case, there were actually felony criminal charges, and I had a video that refuted the allegation and contacted the judge and asked to be able to send the video to the judge, and the person was found not guilty. I wouldn't have been able to sleep at night knowing I had a video that refuted the allegations. So we did that, but almost always we either have documentary evidence or multiple witnesses, and in most cases the teacher will just say, yeah, I did that. So in addition to teachers, so I say that because there's no need to retaliate against somebody for making a report. If that gets produced, if somebody makes an allegation against you, I can only speak for us, but we would be the ones typically doing the investigation on behalf of the school system. We bring in a team, and we don't stop until we have everything that we're confident we have everything that's out there to collect about the situation. And we also don't come in from the perspective of they must have done it or they definitely didn't do it. We come in from the perspective of we have no idea. This person is a blank slate to us. We collect the information and we present it to the school system. Here's what we got. And the school system will decide then what action they feel is necessary to take. In addition to teachers, the State Board of Education has policies on ethics that's applicable to others, and school psychologists, and here are the appropriate policies. School social workers, instructional technology facilitators, and everybody else. I'm not going to really get into the testing code of ethics. Some years back, this got a lot of beefing up. We had lots of issues across the state, and I would say that it coincided probably in 2001, 2002, in 2001 we got No Child Left Behind, and testing became so important everywhere. We had large cases involving teachers who, because of the high stakes of the testing, even I think people who were decent people and good teachers were tempted and made wrong decisions involving testing. We had handing off tests in parking lot. I remember being at a teacher's house at like 11 o'clock at night, retrieving a shredded test from her freezer that she had shredded, and sitting there at a conference room table and putting that thing back together so we could figure out what test it was. And one of the big things that happens is if the release is wide enough, then the school system can be on the hook for the cost of retesting in that area across the state. So let's say you violate the testing code of ethics and release information that you're not supposed to, and a student passes that on to somebody in the neighboring county who passes it on to their best friend 3 counties over. The next thing you know, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars for for the state to retest those kids, because there's no one can ensure the integrity of the testing results that we have based on the widespread release of the test. But I would take a look at this, and the bottom line, and without any equivocation, is you must honor the protective restrictions on tests with absolute 100% integrity. It cannot be that you even take chances with the information getting out. Many, many teachers have lost their job over that.